This is kombucha. It's a drink you make by adding a culture of bacteria called SCOBY to yeast, sugar, and tea. The health benefits of the drink are out of this world, man. Along with providing vital vitamins and nutrients, support for the immune system, and organ health, the bacteria can completely rework your gut's microbiome. It's a trippy miracle drink. For an old hippie, the man sure knew his shit. Usually I don't come to places like the farmer's market, but after my heart scare, Doc said I had to start making some changes. That's wild, man. Hook me up with a few. I figured even if it was snake oil, what have I got to lose? The man leaned in close and popped open a fresh bottle. If you want, I can give you some SCOBY. You can make this wonder drink from the comfort of your own home. He held the fizzling bottle out to me. Something about his expression was unsettling. His eyes were glazed over, and there were red veins crawling from their edges. There were a few pieces of something green stuck in the teeth of his frozen, unmoving smile. He was probably just high. Really? Thanks. Doesn't sound like rocket science or anything, but why would you want to teach a man to fish when you could sell the fish for a profit? He looked at me and unscrewed the lid from a large glass container on his table. The water inside was murky and brown. He reached in and pinched a strange-looking slimy mass that was floating on top. I thought I saw it move. It had to have been my imagination. The old hippie took the piece of SCOBY and put it into a bowl-sized glass jar full of yellow liquid. On the side of the glass was a sticker that read, "Wild and Free Farms." He handed me the jar. "It's not about what makes me profit," he said with that blank glaze. "It's about setting the wonders of this thing free." He continued to stare into my eyes and extended the jar to me. I reached for it, and he let out a short whimper through his teeth. A single tear rolled down his cheek. "You all right?" His face snapped out of its frozen position, and his eyes moved down toward the table to the bottle he'd opened. "Oh, hey, you don't want to forget that guy." "Oh yeah, thanks," I said. I took the open bottle and the jar with the strange slimy mass and turned to leave. When I looked back over my shoulder, the man was still staring at me, waving slowly and smiling. It tasted pretty awful, but it's been my experience that most things that are good for you do. I chugged it and walked to my car. I thought maybe I could figure out a way to cook some of the organic vegetables I'd bought that day into something decent. Probably not. I'd heard of parsnips, but I'm pretty sure up until that day I'd never seen one. My stomach was kind of gurgling after the hippie drink, but I thought my meal, if you could call it that, would mellow things out a bit. Thank God no one was around to see or smell the mess I was making. As I sat down on my porch, eating the abomination I'd made, my mouth began to burn. Fresh cayenne peppers were much hotter than they had any business being. I ran inside and flung the fridge open. Milk, 2 jugs of sweet tea, and flat diet cola were my options. Then I remembered the hippie drink, the kombucha. The bottle of it had messed me up, but something about it was refreshing. Kind of like ginger. It burns, but it's a clean burn, and you get an odd sense of refreshment afterwards. I grabbed the jar from the kitchen table, unscrewed the lid, and took a swig. The slimy mass floating on the top touched my lip. That should have grossed me out, but it didn't. I finished drinking the fluid, and the SCOBY sat alone in the empty jar. Then there was a strange ringing sound in my head. It felt like an alarm was going off. Small tendrils sprouted from the SCOBY, and it began to wiggle. I felt its pain. It was gasping for breath. What was it the old hippie guy said? Sugar, yeast, and tea? I had some sweet tea in the fridge, and that ought to cover the 2 bases, but I don't think I've bought or even seen yeast in my entire life. The ringing went off in my head again, and this time it hurt. It felt like a sharp knife, slipping into the meat of my brain. When it stopped, I felt sick. My stomach was doing cartwheels. It seemed like everything around me began to wiggle. I was going to throw up. What emerged from the pit of my gut was now on the floor. It was a baseball-sized mass of wiggling tissue, and it too had tendrils similar to the SCOBYs on the table. The tendrils flipped and squirmed, and the thing flopped on the floor like a fish out of water. The ringing and the pain came again. I can't quite explain it, but they needed me. I rushed to the neighbor's house and pounded on the door. She was an older woman, retired and most likely home. After what felt like minutes, she cracked the screen door. "Oh, hello there, neighbor. Haven't seen you in a—" "Yeast." The word just blurted out of me. I said it, but it didn't feel like I was saying it. "Yeast?" she replied. "Sorry, yeah, do you have any?" She thought for a moment. "I may have a packet or two, making some bread?" I honestly didn't know what it was for. "Yes, bread." I said the words, but again, they didn't feel like they were coming from my mouth. She squinted behind her glasses and looked at me for a moment. "I'll be right back." Moments passed and she emerged with 2 small packets. "This should be more than enough for a few loaves of bread." My hand reached out quickly and I plucked the packets from her. It was another decision I didn't make. She looked up at me, startled. "In a hurry then. Supper isn't for some hours." My hand was still extended, holding the packets. The ringing blared in my head again, and I rushed back home. My neighbor yelled after me, "Good luck with the bread." When I stepped into the kitchen, the table that the SCOBY was on was covered in pulsing veins. The blob I had coughed up onto the floor had made its way onto the table. Its tendrils were fusing with the tendrils of the SCOBY. They were becoming one. Without thinking, I went to the fridge and fetched the 2 jugs of sweet tea. Then I walked to the bathroom off the kitchen, plugged the tub's drain, and poured them both in. I threw the empty jugs on the floor and looked up into the mirror. To my horror, there were thick brown tendrils reaching downward from my nostrils. The whites of my eyes had become a tapestry of red, tangled veins. My smile, reflecting back at me, wasn't my smile. I couldn't move. I was stuck inside my own body. Something had taken complete control. Never in my life had I wanted to scream more, but I couldn't. Then something in my mind soothed me, like the refreshing feeling of drinking the kombucha for the first time. My hands reached into my pockets and retrieved the packets of yeast. The thing inside of me sprinkled them into the tub. The festering mucus sac on my kitchen table made it to the threshold of the bathroom doorway. It was shooting veinous, vine-looking appendages from itself. They stuck to the walls and objects around it, and the mass used them to propel itself along. I bent and picked it up. As it writhed in my hands, the tendrils that were coming out of my nose extended toward it. Then they met those of the mass. They twisted and fused together. More fell from my mouth, and all at once the thing pulled more blobs from every hole in my face. Small ones from my nostrils, larger ones from my now gaping mouth. This should have hurt, but I felt nothing. I was terrified, but I was also sedated. The mass I was holding, along with the things it pulled from my face, fell into the bathtub. Something was calling me to get in as well. Soon, I was floating in the brown muck. I was being wrapped in a cocoon of wiry tendrils. Chunks of SCOBY were rapidly forming all around me. The water was becoming spongy like dense bread. It was very warm. The SCOBY continued to multiply until my bathtub was overflowing. Later that month, I was set up at my own Wild and Free Farms kombucha stand. I sent pinches of SCOBY home with happy customers. Kombucha became the drink of the summer that year. Stands continued to open up all across the state, and eventually across the entire country. They were growing, wild and free. I hope you enjoyed this super brief story. It's actually one that I wrote some time ago and decided to finally record it. So the next time you find yourself at the farmer's market and somebody offers you something for free, maybe think twice. If you'd like to support the podcast, there are a plethora of ways you can do so, the first of which is leaving a rating or review on whatever podcast streaming service you're listening on. Also, telling your friends or family about the podcast goes a really long way. I also have a Patreon at patreon.com/strangewhispers. That link will also be in the show's notes. However you decide to support, I cannot thank you enough. Thank you again for being here for this story. I've got another full-length story coming very soon, so keep your eyes peeled for that. And until then, keep creating.